So we're continuing to add to the pieces of the puzzle. This next puzzle is agriculture, and to many it's the most complex piece of the puzzle. In my opinion, mostly because it's so interrelated with everything else. When you think about agriculture, in terms of the ditches and the reservoirs, the wetlands it provides, the recreational benefits, to say nothing of the food production and the diversions off the river going towards producing something that we all need. So I'm gonna change hats a bit and change from MC to presenter and try to honor the commitments I make to other people that stick to 10 minutes. So I'm gonna present on regional storage in the South Platte, and it's something that my seat on the Basin Roundtable and many in this room who serve on the Basin Roundtable have looked at in terms of providing for the water challenges that we have in the greater South Platte Basin, particularly here also in the South, or the Poudre rather. So we got presentation. My wife laughed at me when I told her I had 10 minutes because she says I can't introduce myself in 10 minutes, so we'll see how this goes. So how many, by show of hands, are familiar with the Basin Roundtables? Okay, maybe more than half. So very quickly, there's 9 Basin Roundtables. If you are a water nerd, you'll quickly realize there's only 8 basins in Colorado. The legislature, when they created the roundtables, put a 9th together. They split out the South Platte into the South Platte and the Metro, knowing that the Metro area has some unique challenges. With regards to water planning, the South Platte and the Metro Roundtable worked closely together to look at things, and we'll talk a bit about one project that they're looking at. But there's a mission associated with the Basin Roundtables, really to pursue discussions and water management issues and work collaboratively work together. So it further goes on to say in the statutes that it has to do a water supply needs assessment. I'll talk about that in a bit. And look at those unappropriated waters within each of those basins to look at structural and non-structural solutions to meet the needs. And then actively seek input. So the Basin Roundtables are made up of a diverse array of folks who are involved in water issues. All the meetings are open to the public, so we get lots of opportunities for input. This is a dated list, so I won't go into the specifics around it, but this is showing of many of the people that are seats on the Basin Roundtable, and this next slide also shows the many that are on the roundtable. It's one of the largest of the 9 Basin Roundtables in terms of representation, and it doesn't come as a surprise, not only because of the South Platte and its geographic size, but the complexities around the South Platte. So one of the first asks by the legislature when the roundtables were set up is create that needs assessment. So they did a needs assessment. And not surprisingly, in the South Platte, we have a lot of needs. Specifically, what they came up with is we have an existing supply shown in the blue bar, and then we have what the needs are for the future, and that got coined in all circles of the state as the gap. So each basin has its own gap. We're looking at about a 500,000 acre-foot gap, which is to say we have needs with the existing population in terms of environmental and recreation and agriculture that's ongoing currently, and then we have future needs in terms of future growth and people that are coming here. The South Platte Basin is projected to double in population by 2050, and that's moved off a little bit further to the future, but it's going to double in population. Half of that doubling is going to be folks like me that had the 2.3 kids, and the other half are going to be folks like me that come from other parts of the country and move here. So I'm a double hit, but I'm already here, so we can put up the fence. Here's a snapshot of basically the Greeley area up and downstream of irrigated agriculture. We saw a similar slide earlier from the Poudre Commissioner. This is just to demonstrate illustratively what happens with this basin when we have a projected need, particularly for municipal and industrial. We have a Plan A. The Plan A historically in Colorado has been buy and dry. Some circles that's a curse word, in other circles that's a really responsible way of providing water. We do have, as the keynote pointed out, we do have lots of water in the agricultural sector. So with that lots of water there and the growth that occurs, buy and dry is a pretty turnkey method to be able to provide water for growing areas. What the roundtable discovered is there's only so much to go around, and what does buy and dry begin to look like? So this is a snapshot of 2010, 2020, 2030, 2040, 2050, becomes a fundamentally different place. And I think it really sparked the conversation of what does that do for the quality of life? What does that do for local economies? Is that necessarily a Colorado that we want to see? Governor Hickenlooper in 2013 issued an executive order. And the executive order says, okay, roundtables, you've been at it for a while. What's the plan? What are we going to do? I want to hear from you, and we want to roll that up and look at it collectively as a state. So the 2013 order said the South Platte Basin is our largest agricultural producing basin. So the executive order that's statewide looked specifically at the South Platte and said, the South Platte, you're our largest agricultural producing basin. What are you going to do? And Coloradans, statewide, find the current rate of buy and dry is unacceptable. Okay, so there's the challenge. The gauntlet's been laid. When drafting Colorado's water plan, the CWCB is directed to utilize the basin roundtables and build upon points of consensus. So what do we do as water nerds? We started talking about those points of consensus, and we spent a lot of time talking about that. We came up with what we call 11 points or 11 elements. I bolded the ones that are about a project that I want to talk to you about, but we maximize implementation of projects that are already in place. We talked about conservation. We wanted to look at reuse. How can reuse be more utilized in the South Platte? We wanted to maximize effective use of the South Platte Basin supplies, what we already have in play. Can we just get our house in order and do more of that? We wanted to minimize the ag buy and dry and use ATMs, share water with the agricultural communities. We want to protect and enhance environmental recreation benefits. If we develop additional supplies, can we do that in conjunction with environmental recreation? Can we provide multiple benefits? We want to look at the Colorado River. Is there more available supplies there? And as you can imagine on their forum, they don't like that bullet. Manage risk for climate change, promote multi-purpose storage projects, facilitate effective communications and outreach programs, research new technologies, and advocate for improvements to federal and state permitting processes. That's an easy one. So we created what's called SPROWG, South Platte Regional Opportunities Working Group. And it was a bunch of regional providers that got together and said, let's go ahead and just forget our brand that we're riding for. Let's just look at it as water planners. Let's look at it people that care about this basin, and how would we manage that next round of water supplies? A very, very different way of looking at planning. Historically, water planning in Colorado and in the South Platte Basin has been very siloed. Specifically, who are you providing for and plan for that project? So it's very regional in nature. And we also worked together, and we didn't much care whether or not we had some history there. We just wanted to look at what the future might have. So what we came up with is a concept, and it's a little difficult to see. The green dotted line is the South Platte River. Where it takes its first bend is the Kersey gauge, and then it moves further out east. Each of the purple triangles is a potential off-channel storage project. It would involve exchanging water. It would involve potentially pumping water. It would potentially make use of shared resources and involve maybe a regional water treatment plant, maybe a treated pipeline, maybe a raw water pipeline, all concepts that were thrown around. But the group, when it got together, said, you know, there might be something here. So we looked at the different sources of supply that might be available, and this depicts on a spatial level what might be available in this type of project. Mostly free river. As we know with the South Platte, there are certain times a year and certain stretches of the river where we have more than we can possibly divert, consume, use. There's other stretches of the river where that's not quite the case. So between all the various pieces of the pie, we feel like there's sufficient yield there to continue this conversation. So what we came up with is, all in all, between the 3 storage facilities that might be available, the exchanges, the alternative transfer methods, and sharing with agriculture, the reuse, you put all those together, and there's a possibility of upwards to 50,000 acre-foot of firm yield. While that was going on, the legislature ordered what was called the South Platte Storage Study. So this was a sister effort that was going on. And what it identified is there's nearly 300,000 acre-foot per year that could be diverted over the past 20 years. So again, further proving that idea of the South Platte does give in certain years, and what are we doing to maximize that? And that's above and beyond the compact that we are obligated to move further downstream. So this got brought back to the roundtable and said, between the storage study and what we were doing with SPROWG, we think there's really something here, but it just can't reside in our smaller group that we kicked it around. We really need to have a larger conversation. So we went to the Basin Roundtable and said, what do you think about going for a grant, and what about making it a Basin Roundtable effort? The Basin Roundtable said, great, but we've been talking amongst ourselves for some time. We really ought to start going out and take this on the road. So we put together some workshops. Those were held over the course of a few months and got water providers in the room and other stakeholders and started saying, what do you think about this idea? Where should it go? So what they came up with those workshops and the input was, hey, this does have some neat concepts in it. It does seem like it has some legs. Let's go to the next step. So we developed a lot of questions, which is, what would the organization look like? How would this be structured? Who would actually look at such a project, and how would it be funded? What kind of needs are out there? Do we really know what those M&I needs? Do we know exactly where they are? If the water supplies are not in the same location, how do we functionally get there? What are the environmental and recreation benefits? How exactly would it be benefited? How would that operate? What are the water quality issues? If you're taking quality down lower, how does that get to a municipal and industrial entity, and is it of quality that would be sufficient to be able to do that? Look at the configurations. Those purple triangles on the map really in the right location, where ought they be? What are the cost estimates of it? If it's a costly project that's maybe 3-4 times what the market can bear, are we just 20, 30, 50 years too early? What if we need to start looking at that now so that we're online in 20 or 50 years? Would the market line up at that time? And then outreach and communication. How are we working with the community? Do people understand what we're trying to achieve? What's the sense of the community there? So we've hired a consultant team with the grant money that's available. We've put a task force together. Anything that involves water, people actually join these things and engage in the conversation. If you're interested in being part of it, let me know and we can get you added on to that. We do have subcommittees that'll focus on more in-depth conversations around ag, municipal, industrial, environment, recreation, and education. And then we're going to have multiple outreach meetings. So that's what the Basin Roundtable is up to. That's what we're trying to do to meet those needs in honor of what the legislature put together some years ago to say, go ahead and start figuring out on a basin by basin basis. And we're going to do questions and answers afterwards, so I'm happy to answer any questions there. And I'm going to turn it over to Greg and Brett.
Good afternoon. My name is Greg Kernohan. I work for Ducks Unlimited, and I oversee a lot of our mitigation and environmental market development programs. I've had the great fortune of working in Colorado for the last 20 years, and most of that time has been focused on water resource issues. If you think it's tough to find water to put on your lawn, think about trying to convince somebody to put water into a wetland, and you'll know how difficult my job has been. But what I've been fortunate in is being able to work with the water community to come up with some really interesting solutions to their needs, and in turn meets my needs, because what do I want to do? I just want to grow ducks and make sure there's lots of ducks out there. So it's been a great relationship. Most of our work is really focused on the past and building wetlands that recharge groundwater for river augmentation. But we've also been really fortunate to work on projects that have studied flexible water markets. And at the end of several years' studies in partnership with Colorado corn growers, City of Aurora, and others, we basically came to the conclusion, well, this will never work. And so I went back to building recharge ponds. That landed me on the doorstep of the New Cache Irrigating Company. And I'm pretty sure Dale Trowbridge, who's out there if you haven't met him yet, who's the manager of New Cache, probably regrets opening the door that day because I just wanted to build recharge ponds for him. And when I started to recognize where the New Cache is located, which is on this map is everything in the yellow boundary, it is a vibrant irrigating district right outside of one of the fastest growing municipalities in the United States, the city of Greeley. And yet it's still 85% owned by agriculture. They've got all of the elements to build flexible water markets. They've got reservoirs, ditches, exchange capacity, all these different things that if you're looking to build a flexible water market, you really want to have in place and be successful. And guess what? The people that still own the water, 85% of the members, still want to be in agriculture. So we took that and looked at it as a real opportunity to re-examine flexible water markets once again. And I was able to recruit a few smart people. Luckily, most smart people really like ducks, and so they tolerate me. And we were able to put a great team together to really look at the potential for another one of these flexible water markets. Talking a little bit more about what Sean was talking about, is there is a major gap out there. I'm sure you've talked about it quite a bit over the course of the day. But this in the purple here is an area where most people will tell you, we don't know where we're going to find the water. We do not know how we're going to fill that gap at this point, but we all know basically we are going to find the water. It's probably going to come from agriculture. But how do we do that? How do we get that water from agriculture and still maintain viable areas, rural economies, is really the real question. And from the Colorado Water Plan, when you look at the map of the South Platte, we're looking at losing between 20 and 30% of the irrigated agriculture out there. What people don't tell you is that not everybody stood up and said, well, I'll give up my 20%, that would be fine. It's not going to be across the board. It's going to be in Weld and Larimer counties is where a lot of this water is going to transfer out of agriculture. So how is it that we can have an impact and do something different that keeps water in agricultural ownership, keeps ag in production, but still provides water to municipalities when it's needed? And this is the other thing for Ducks Unlimited that's really interesting to us, is that within the New Cache district, there's a lot of wetlands still on the landscape, a lot of potentially restorable wetlands. And that, for us, is obviously our goal. If we can maintain those ecological goods and services that provide habitat, that's the one thing that we want to accomplish. But a really interesting study that came out from a master's student at CSU a few years ago really highlighted the potential to have an impact, a negative impact on wetlands, was that as we increase efficiency, so even as we just trade from flood irrigation to sprinkler irrigation or improve the conveyance systems by lining ditches, et cetera, the potential to lose wetlands just from those actions is about 21 to 50% of 26 to 51% of the wetlands on the landscape will disappear just from changing those. Imagine what happens when we remove the water from the landscape completely. So that also had an economic impact. About $5,500 per hectare, about $2,700 per acre is lost because we lose those ecological goods and services, clean water, abundant retimed water. All the different things that wetlands provide is lost from that landscape as we start to lose these habitats. So that's the thing that Ducks Unlimited is very much interested in. And so we were very fortunate, and I'll use fortunate loosely because the BOR grant, the Water Smart grant, we applied for it almost 2 years ago and were just awarded the contract recently. But we are also working with Colorado Water Conservation Board to really pursue the opportunity to finally build a water marketing structure that allows us to have a wet water trade. So a lot of the stuff that you'll see out there about water markets, it's all theoretical. We've studied it, we've talked about it. Can we do it? What are the barriers to it? This will actually allow us to build a new organization within New Cache to actually build a water market that will trade water, wet water. So we've got 2 years now that we're starting out on this endeavor where we can build the structure, the legal framework to accomplish these goals, and actually secure the water rights that are needed to make these trades happen. And what's funny about water markets is there's never been a lack of supply. If you talk to farmers, they're interested in doing something different with their water, something innovative, something more lucrative potentially. But when you go to the demand side, there's really not a lot of demand. We've heard the term buy and dry today, and that's really kind of the status quo. How do we work to convince municipalities, industries, and other environmental groups and other agriculture that there is a need for a flexible water market in their portfolio? And a good part of this project is actually focusing on that demand side. Partnership, education, outreach, talking about the economics of water marketing and where that could fit in their portfolio. So to talk about that today is someone who is smarter than me and tolerates me. I've brought Brett Bovey along to talk about the economics of these water markets.
Thanks, Greg. And as he was saying, we just heard kind of two interesting talks. The lunch talk was advocating markets to fix some of our water problems. And I will tell you, Northern Colorado has been doing that for a long time, and it looks like buy and dry. Those are markets. Voluntary agreements, moving water from one place to the next, reallocating it. And several years ago, a decade ago, the state wanted to explore other ideas on how you could move and reallocate water on a non-permanent basis. And that's sort of the underlying definition of an alternative water transfer, which is sometimes referred to as an ATM in Colorado policy lingo. The idea, the defining thing was it wasn't permanent, that you wouldn't permanently dry up a piece of farm ground to reallocate the water. You could do it under more of a water sharing, more of a lease type agreement. And that's the idea with this project, is to utilize the New Cache service area and its shareholder members to pilot an idea where municipalities can get a supply source that didn't permanently dry up a piece of farm ground. That's the concept. So, as I said, these ideas of ATMs, or let's just say flexible water sharing agreements, have been studied, looked at, and endeavored over for over 10 years in the state. And there hasn't been a ton of traction, as in good examples of these being put into place. There are examples, but just not a long laundry list of them. And there's some good reason why. And I'll call these the hurdles. And what I have on this slide is sort of 3 hurdles that I think are prominent into why we haven't seen more of these sharing agreements. And then I have some ideas or concepts that we're going to explore about jumping over those hurdles. So first hurdle is certainty. So municipal water providers, for good reason, if they promise someone through a water tap that they're going to get water service, it's really on them if they can't provide that water. And so when you talk about lease agreements with water, and I bring up the idea of, hey, just lease the supply from us. There's a lot of concern from their side that they're not going to have the water to provide the taps they basically sold off. And so permanent acquisition has long been the preferred method, and I think it will continue to be the preferred method of the municipal sector because of certainty. Accepting that, I think our view is, you might not get a year in and year out supply, and let's not confuse certainty with reliability. So, yeah, you can have an unreliable supply, but you're certain how unreliable it is, and that's, I guess, where we want to provide. We have the money and we have the analysis to basically show, what is the reliability of supply, so that our municipal providers can be certain about what our contracts are. And some of this is the way you write the contracts, and just being certain on both sides what supply is being provided and when. The second hurdle is cost. And, the fact is, if you're going to own and use something for the rest of eternity, you might want to buy it. This is the reason you might own or rent a house. It's the same reason you might own or lease a car. That financially, when you look at these types of transactions, there's reasons to buy things. And a long-term lease of something can be more expensive than going out and acquiring it. Having said that, our area in northern Colorado is really interesting because of how expensive water is getting. I will say the financing of this is really dependent on escalation discount rates. We did a study a couple years ago where we looked at a couple case studies on how water leasing looks versus buying. And, you play with those interest rates, you play with the discount rates, it matters. Like, if things escalate faster, you might want to go ahead and buy it now. So I'll say that. But what's happening in northern Colorado is we're getting very expensive water. I threw up the number here of $50,000 per acre foot. Roughly what it costs to buy a unit in the CBT system on a per acre foot basis. That number, let's say it costs you, or your funding, financing was 5%. Your loan is at 5%. The equivalent is $2,500 per acre foot. And so that's just really interesting because the things you can do under a lease agreement at $2,500 an acre foot and not pay the $50,000 per acre foot opens up a lot of doors for ATM type agreements. Final hurdle is dedication patterns. ATMs or flexible water sharing agreements are really difficult to structure when you have a policy or a system where each house, the supply is dedicated for each new house. This supply is going to serve this house. ATMs and flexible water sharing agreements are very difficult to structure when you look at supply and demand in that way. Doors open up when you start to take more of a portfolio look, and every municipal water provider has a very complicated portfolio of water rights and supplies. And I think where we hope to provide value is not in year in and year out supply all the time, but more in a how do we fit into those portfolios well and cost effectively. And one more slide I have is to sort of some things we've been thinking about why, despite all those hurdles, why do we think we can jump over them and do something here? And a large reason is these 6 bullets up here. The new cash system works well for water sharing and leasing agreements. I'll just run through the 6 bullets. There's a lot of shareholder interest. We ran a shareholder meeting and asked shareholders if they're interested, and a significant percentage voluntarily said, yes, we're interested in exploring something here. So that's key. Multiple transfers and end uses. I have a little map here, but we basically, you can look upstream towards the treatment plants that come out of the canyon. You can look downstream to its confluence with the South Platte, and be aware that things have changed on the Poudre River Basin. The demand on the Poudre River Basin extends all the way to South Denver. I can explain that under a break if you're interested, but the reality is our basin up here is tied to South Denver. And that's why municipal water providers in South Denver own shares in our irrigation companies up here. So, looking downstream along the Poudre, there's demand down that way. And third is non-potable uses in the Windsor and Greeley area. So there's multiple end uses and transfer opportunities just based on the geography of where the new cash system is. It's a large company, 58,000 acre feet and 32,000 acres. That scale provides you opportunity to do things. Diverse water rights and supply, so there's 3 companies that are involved in this, a reservoir company, a irrigation company, direct flow, and an augmentation company that's already been through water court. That provides some flexibility to do something. And precedence. There's been previous water court change cases, and New Cash has already done lease agreements on multiple year terms, so there's some precedence. We're not starting from ground zero. And finally is the grant program that Greg talked about. I mean, part of why this might work is because we have a grant to try to make it work. And I'll just throw a plug to Colorado Water Conservation Board. If you're interested in projects like this and have ideas, they have a grant program that they want to put money to these types of ideas. So go talk to the CWCB about it. So with those, that's my view of why I'm confident we can jump those hurdles.
Thank you. So since this is an ag piece of the puzzle, thankfully the committee in its infinite wisdom thought they'd actually get someone who could talk about agriculture and not just wonky people like us. But at any rate, please welcome Zach.
Thank you, Sean. Brett, I think there's interest on your time that you took. You give an economist 10 minutes and they get interest. A quick plug, I'm in the Colorado Ag Leadership Program. We are doing the Governor's Ag Forum February 27th. I have some flyers up here. It's a great day of discussion about ag and water and several issues around the state. I'm a rancher from Livermore, Colorado. I run 600 cows and irrigate about 500 acres in Livermore. And we have a lot of fun up there every day. One of my ranch ends is here, Andrew West in the back, and we're here today because we want to talk about water. So I'm the chairperson of the Larimer County Ag Advisory Board, and we've been working on water problems in Larimer County for a long time. And we know there's a problem, right? And we've talked about it a little bit, there's not enough water. Everybody wants it, and then I think we've heard a few times this morning that the environment wants some too. And we can see that, right? Brett talks about $50,000 an acre foot water. It's going up every day. So we know that there's a shortage of water and everybody wants some. The other thing is there's no new supplies. And there's an increase in hydrologic variability. If you think about what climate change might or might not mean, we don't know, and we know that there's a lot of variability in all of that. And then we have, that went black. We have urbanization. So Steve Mailers is a plug for you. Thank you for some charts off of your website. It's a very good website. Some charts here from urbanization from 1960 to 2017. You can see the red star is where we're sitting today. It was once green, now it's gray because everybody wants to live here, right? And they didn't shut the door before Sean and his 2.3. I want to know how many diapers a 0.3 has, but my 4 have a lot. So you can see we have urbanization, right? And that creates more demand for water. Then we have another problem, right? We have the fact that most of the crops that we grow as farmers use, and by use, I mean poof, up into thin air in evaporation and transpiration, 20 to 26 inches of water a year. And then when you have a bunch of lawyers in Colorado, you go to water court and they fight about it and they get you down to about 10 inches or maybe 18 if you're lucky. So then we leave water back in the ditch companies as return flows, which is great for the junior water providers. And then you go to your municipalities and they say, guess what? You need to bring us 36 to 60 inches of water per acre for your new development. So when you dry up, or when you build 1 acre of development, we have to dry up between 3 and 5 acres of farm ground. That's not very sustainable. And then now we see, so buy and dry becomes the known option because, yes, there's no new supplies, right? So you can see this is CBT ownership. Thank you, Andy, for some of your data. For 1960 to 2017, pink line is municipal, blue line is ag. You can see that we're all starting to retire, but I'm not quite to that age yet, so I have a problem. And then this, I'm gonna jump one. Okay, and then this is, so the green line, there's a lot of lines on this, so you can get, the blue line is the historic average where it says river flow. The green line is the 2002, 2003 average flow. The lighter green line that's a little there in the middle, that's drought. And then the red line is the 2003 and 4 when we had no runoff and a severe drought, so there was no hydrologic peak. And then the green line that says irrigation demand, that's when all our crops want water, right? And then you see river flow happens before our crops want water. That requires reservoirs because we need to slow the river down so we can use the water 20 minutes later. Well, guess what? Farmers we like to take vacations in October. We quit using water in October. Or municipalities, they don't have a choice. Their water users want to be able to take a shower in October and November, December, January, February, March, April, and May. So when they buy our farm water up, they have a problem. And I'm going to read this because it says, buy and dry will not work without more storage for full year delivery. You cannot take our farm water and deliver it to your users unless they only want it in May, June, and July. So you guys work that out with your voters. They might work with that. This is just drill. And the other problem is as our farmers are risk takers, right? So we like to go broke and then try to make money again and go broke and try to make money again and then convince you all we're broke again. And so we use our reservoirs from the bottom all the way to the top. And then we do it again next year and we hope that it snows so we can take our snowmobiles out while we're not taking a shower and go out in the mountains. So you can see the blue line is just the total deliveries out of a multi-use reservoir in the CBT system. And you can see that there's a slow decline in their total deliveries. Some of that's just nuances, but some of it is the fact that water providers are risk adverse. They don't want to go to the bottom of their reservoir and hope that their water users are going to be able to take a shower next year because they might not have a job next year when their showers don't run. So not only does buy and dry not work without new reservoirs, our existing reservoirs aren't yielding as much as they used to. Let me jump. So this is just a little picture of what happens when farms are dried up, right? So you have irrigators here. You have a small city. You have effluent to the river. And then you have all these little farmers with conjunctive use and wells. It's a complicated diagram there. But when farms are dried up, that return flow obligation exists. So they have to send back the water that historically those lawyers decided they didn't use, which was probably not quite the right number, but lawyers are good at that. And so then you have these bigger cities, right? And I just think of municipalities as big square black blocks. I don't really think much more about them. And so they grow bigger, so they need more reservoirs because they need that water in what? November, December, January, February, March. Otherwise their folks get smelly. And then we have bigger, those green arrows represent the return flows. Well, guess what? The cities need the ditch companies to stay in business so they can keep sending their return flows down the ditch to deliver them back where they once went. That's all part of a water court decree that the lawyers fought about over a cigar and a scotch. And we ended up with a bunch of return flows that they have to give. And I don't know what the word forever really means, but I've had 4 kids in diapers and it feels like forever. So I think they need us to stay in business so those ditch companies can stay going so that they can keep giving their return flows back where the water court said you need to give them. Plus, we need to stay in business because most of these cities want 5, 6, 7 acre feet of water per acre because of hydrologic variability, right? Mark Simpson said 700,000 acre feet all the way down to 100,000 acre feet in a drought coming out of the Poudre Basin. Well, that's exciting because you guys still need to take showers when it's 100,000 acre feet. So that's why those water providers want so much water. But guess what? Most of the years we have more than 100,000. So there's excess water. They need farmers to lease that from them. I appreciate all the cities and the districts around here that do lease water back to farmers. It's kept our economies viable for a long time. So why do we need to work together? Well, right, because there's more water than the cities can use in normal and wet years, probably 7 years out of 10. Again, I'm not speculating about the future because I don't know what it holds. But yeah, we need to work together because our economies are tied together. You know, I've been talking to Roy Otto at the city of Greeley a bunch, and you know, most of their economy is based on agriculture. So if you dry up all the agriculture around Greeley, that starts to hurt a little bit. So we need to be real creative about designing our water systems and designing our economies so that we work together rather than fighting each other. And then the other thing, this is just out of the Larimer County area here, our citizens want agriculture. They want open spaces. They want things like that. So we had a vote here in Larimer County a couple of years ago about open space tax, and it was voted for 86%. And I don't think there's been very many ballot initiatives that have passed anywhere near 86%. And that's because of things like open space and rural character and wildlife habitat like Greg's wetlands and ducks. And there's probably a couple geese that float around here. And then we have clean air and clean water, right? That's all part of the system. And so we need each other to stay in business. So there's a call to action here. I think we need to develop working relationships to make sure that we're all viable, including the municipalities and agricultural producers. We need to leverage collaboration, right? We need to quit fighting with each other over water. We need to quit fighting with each other over storage. And we need to find ways that we can work together. And then we need to get out of our silos and do land use planning and economic development and water use planning as a group rather than just in our offices with those what are they, cubicles? See, she made me sit here for 20 minutes to talk for 10. I've never sat still for 20 minutes ever. And so I can't think about doing work in a cubicle, in a silo. I think we ought to work together. Thank you.
Kind of a mic drop moment. We have 2 minutes for questions.
When I see that, my name's Dennis Harmon. When I see that map about the reduction in agriculture in 2050 or whatever it was, I'm wondering, what does everybody think about the availability and cost of groceries?
Well, so I eat the cows that nobody wants to eat because that's what I do. I own cows, so I'm not too worried about it myself. But I think we've seen exponential increases in groceries already, and it's really expensive to keep doing that when water gets up to $500 an acre foot. Plus, I doubt we're going to see cheaper freight than we see today. So to get groceries from Mexico or California or Canada or the East Coast is going to cost more in the future.
Okay, so you talked about how much crops use in water. How much do cows use for their water yearly?
Well, if you're talking about how much they drink, it just depends on the type of cow. I mean, dairy cows drink a lot. My cows out in the pasture drink 5 gallons a day.
No, I mean the whole process from having the cow drink the water to having it processed and packaged as meat in the store. How much water is used for that?
Well, it's all about the cow eats a lot of crops, right? And those crops have evapotranspiration, and that's really the water you're talking about, because cows don't store water their whole life. They pee most of it out. But the evaporation of the crops that they eat, I mean, they eat 30 pounds of dry matter a day for 15 months, and I think we're getting better about getting our cows killed before and harvested and into the grocery store before they waste as much as they used to. But it's hard to know that number exactly. It depends on the place and what they're fed.
I think, both questions, the grocery cost question and that question are very relevant to one of the discussions we had at our table earlier this morning, which is the trade-offs, right? I mean, we don't spend a whole lot of time thinking about why can't we have it all? There's trade-offs in all of this stuff. And so if we're not producing enough food locally, we have to ship it in, grocery costs go up. The trade-off with cows and going to a more plant-based diet is that we're going to potentially switch from irrigated crops to dryland crops. those yields need a lot more cultivated land and a lot more environmental consequences from those kinds of practices. So, I think we have to get to a point where we're starting to talk about what are the trade-offs and what do we really want the future to look like.